You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB, University at Albany. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with the microphone, here with Alyssa Lotmore, MSW, LMMSW, former or is an alum of the School of Social Welfare, as am I, and with Luke Stein on the board. So, guys, we're ready to do another show today. We have a guest. We have one guest who's calling in a little bit later in the show, Lillian Glass, Ph.D. Her book is The Body Language of Liars, From Little White Lies to Pathological Deception. And she's also written another book. One of her other books is she's the author of Toxic People, amongst other books, and you may have seen her. I know, Alyssa, you said this morning you've seen her on a lot of television shows. She's an expert on deception and lying, and I guess they call her in. They must call her into some of these court cases, I think.
Well, I actually saw her on Entertainment Tonight.
Oh, you did?
When she was analyzing John and Kate plus 8's divorce. And I've also seen her on the Today Show talking about charm. That was one of her topics.
Charm. So what? I don't know any charm. Oh, people who charm you, who are lying. Easy to get kind of engaged with them, connected, and then get fooled. Is that what she's saying?
Well, she was saying that that's like one of the most important things that people look at. It doesn't matter about, even for dating, it doesn't matter sometimes about wealth. It doesn't matter about status. If you can charm that person, you can get away into their life. And that's a key piece to some of the deception.
And there are consequences to that. I think social workers are confronted with that when you're counseling somebody or doing therapy with somebody in a clinical setting or even in your own private practice, because very often I think clients come in and they want to engage you and they want to charm you. They want you to like them. They want to be the best patient. I mean, and that probably is a normal process, but I think sometimes it can be an indication of someone who has deeper or more deep-seated problems, that wanting to charm you and to get you to believe things that aren't true.
And that's so I'm really interested in hearing her, because as social workers, we're trying to build that rapport, establish those relationships. And sort of we have to reevaluate our own boundaries so we don't get too caught up in what people are saying. So we have to keep that objectiveness and use our social work skills that we've learned in school to and our experience to really separate what is truth and what is not. And I think the body language that she's talking about in her books is going to be a great way for us to. I'm looking for some tips, I guess. Yeah. Just because we as social workers, we're taught about the body language of anxiety, of depression, of all of these emotional issues, but we're really not talking about when someone is not telling us the truth or when someone is trying to give us false information.
Yeah, I think one of the things that she says in her book, and I think you just touched on it, is that body language is important, because body language will belie what the person is saying. They're telling you one thing, but yet they're not looking you. This is simple, but they're not looking you in the eye. They're wringing their hands. They're sweating. They're turning their head. And on one hand, they're maybe denying something, or whatever that you are asking them or questioning them about. And so they're not in sync. They're not congruent, body language and what they have to say.
And it's really important because a lot of people don't really know their body language. No one really understands, or I guess really processes what their body language is saying. So when they practice what they want to say, whether it's a lie, when they're trying to come up with this whole thing, they're not really looking at themselves and, hey, what happens when I do tell a lie? What are some sort of these signs that I do? Am I wringing my hands? Am I doing something with my facial expressions? So it's really important for other people to know that, because a lot of people don't evaluate themselves when they're lying.
So what would you say about us? I mean, Luke, you're watching us when we talk, and we're both on microphones. No one can see us, but they can hear us. And I talk with my hands, and so do you. And that's one thing I think that most radio personalities do, that you talk with your hands. Because if you're sitting here just folding your hands, I mean, you try doing it, try speaking on the air and not moving. It's very difficult, uncomfortable. It doesn't fit, right? So we have this kind of animated body language, which hopefully fits what we have to say and the way in which we're saying it, because we wouldn't be animated. We wouldn't, I think it would be very dull if you sit here and try to just sit with your hands folded and not moving. Try it. It doesn't work well. I mean, Luke's on the board, so he's always moving his little, what do you call it, faders? No.
Yeah, I think they generally, I think faders is the right word. Sorry. In terms of this, I don't see the point in going to therapy if you're not going to present a truthful image of yourself, because you're paying that person to like you. Regardless of how charming you may or may not be, that person has to at least pretend that you're interesting and that they like you. And so I always go in, I mean, it's always a process for like building more and more trust and being willing to disclose more and more to the therapist, but I try to be as honest as possible with the therapist. Well, so, I mean, even if it's, because recently I had to change therapists, because I didn't feel a connection with the person I was seeing. And after 4 sessions, I was like, after 3 sessions, I was like, this is not working out. I need to be transferred to someone else. They're like, why? I'm like, I have to explain myself too much, and I feel like I eat up so much of this session, like, re-explaining what I'm talking about, and that's just a waste of both of our times, so.
Well, I think that's wise. At least you have the motivation, and you understand yourself and what you're not getting out of it to be able to say, this isn't working. Because I think a lot of people stay in therapy for a long period of time, and it's costs money and time, and you need to move on and go to another therapist.
Right.
But if you're moving from therapist to therapist all the time, then you have to take a look at yourself. Maybe it's something that I'm not connecting, and there's something not going on. But you, I'm assuming, you don't have to say it, but are going voluntarily. And as a social worker, I worked in probation for a long time, so I would get a lot of clients who were referred from probation who did not want to be there. Absolutely not. And their goal was to get out of there as quickly as possible, to come off as good as they could no matter what they did. And so there was always this element, a lot of lying, a lot of pretending, a lot of blaming other people. So this kind of thing, the body language of liars would have been very helpful then, because I think this was in a huge, big social service agency. This is what happened all the time. So the circumstances were different. Mm-hmm.
And also people who are often in that field in dealing with people who don't want to be there. I experienced that when I was in rehab dealing with the counselors there. When I was taking my recovery seriously, like the therapist or the counselor that I was assigned to wasn't providing me much help, because he was mostly trained in dealing with people who were very resistant to staying alcohol and drug free. And so someone that was actively working a program of recovery, he didn't have much input for, like, I brought my life problems, but he wasn't very talkative on those. So,
and I think that sometimes that's common. I don't want to say common, but it does happen when somebody's so used to people not wanting to go past a certain step. When somebody actually wants to keep going and is coming to you with their issues, it's sort of they freeze because it's something that they haven't had much experience or training in, because they're used to always stopping or trying to work so hard to even get to step 1 or step 2, that when somebody's already trying to get you to go to like step 8 or 9, they don't know what to do. They freeze. So it's not that they don't have the skills. I mean, I'm sure they've learned it somewhere, but they haven't had an opportunity to practice it in so long that it just gets lost.
What about when the therapist is lying? I mean, you mentioned you want somebody who cares about you or likes you. Is like the right word? We have to talk about that. But, the therapist who has a client who they don't like, who, for whatever reason, and that's all involved in the transference. That's part of the process of interacting with your client. But does the therapist smile and lie, or can the client discern, like, how does the therapist really feel about this relationship? Because it does work both ways.
It does. Yeah. No one has to like every client they have. I mean, there might be some sort of clash, or, like I said, something that reminds them, but you have to, provide the service in a respectful way and a way that makes your client feel comfortable. You're there to help them. And whether you have your own inner issues or not with that person, you still have a right to provide them with all of the treatment or whatever you're providing for them in the best possible way.
But what point, and you've been doing therapy now, I haven't been doing it in the immediate right now. So at what point do you, if there's something about a client you feel like we just can't, I don't think I can do this. How do you reconcile that? Or what do you do? Or do you talk to somebody else about it? I mean, you can't pick and choose all your clients. Like you said, you have to be professional. But what if it's, it's just not going to work? This person is just somebody that you can't help. Go ahead.
Well, I was in the school setting, so it wasn't with the adult population. I was with middle school students, but I was fortunate to have another, social worker there who sometimes had a better relationship with the student. So sometimes we would say, okay, would you like to see the student? I think you'd have more of I'll try, but maybe you'll have more of a better building rapport with her better. You already have that rapport with her. Maybe you try to see her and she has to open up to you. But the most important thing is doing what's best for the client, the person that needs your help. So if sometimes therapists have to say, maybe I'm not the best person. You can't just say, oh, I'm the best therapist. I can do any type of therapy with any person. Sometimes you have to step back and say, hey, I'm not the right person for this client. But my colleague is. Let's send her to that person instead.
I think that's why it's important that anybody who's doing therapy or doing counseling should have been or should be in therapy or counseling themselves. They have to have an understanding of where they're coming from and what their issues are, because everybody has issues, and where they may or may not get in the way with certain clients with certain problems. If you're a therapist and if you had an alcoholic father, for instance, and you have a client who has a drinking problem, it might impact, or it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't see that client, but you have to understand where you're coming from. And I think that's why it's really important. And I think any therapist, and if you're looking for another therapist, well, I hope you found the one you want, but Luke, I think that's it. I don't know if a therapist has to tell you whether or not they've been in counseling or not, but I definitely, if I were seeking out a therapist, that would be a question that I would ask. I would want to know that they themselves have been in therapy.
It's all about self-reflection on the part of the therapist as well. I mean, there's a lot of, boundary issues, your past, and you're also dealing with a lot of people are coming to you, especially those who work in trauma type settings. If people are coming to you with trauma and you're hearing it over and over, therapy is a good thing for a therapist to have, because you're hearing a lot of stories that are uncomfortable and that you might need to have help processing as well. So therapy for the therapist is something that can be a good thing as well.
That's sorry. That's actually something I asked therapists. I asked this therapist in our first session. That was on my list of questions I had for him. Was have you been in therapy before? Because 2 therapists ago, after the one because I go to the PSC, so there's the rotating.
PSC. What is PSC?
Oh, Psychological Services Center. It's the training center for the University of Albany. PhD program in psychology.
Well, that's good to know about it. I don't want to interrupt your thought, but so that's available to whom?
To the whole community. Like everyone. It's located at 299 Washington Ave, downtown, in between Lexington and Henry Johnson. And it's $5 a session if you're a student, then it's sliding scale if you're not a student. And it's like the training center for the school. And I've been going there for probably like 2.5 years, I guess. 2 years. I don't know. I've been through a number of therapists there. And the previous one who I was with for an extended period of time before she left for after her time training there was done.
No, I guess our guest is calling. We'll have to wait until after the show, and then we will finish because our guest is calling in. So we will, Alyssa, I think we should take a break after Luke gets our guests on the line. And
I'm very excited about hearing her.
Yeah, hearing her tell the truth. Let's see. Do we believe her? What does she have to say, right? So, Dr. Glass, we'll go for a break for a couple minutes, and then we'll come back. You're listening to WCDB University at Albany. Kathryn Zox and Alyssa Lotmore, the Social Workers Radio Talk Show.
A single ember from a wildfire can travel over a mile. It can ignite and destroy your home and even your community. To that ember, all those branches hanging over your roof might as well be giant matchsticks ready to spark. The pile of dry leaves and twigs clogging your gutters are the perfect kindling to start a fire. And all those debris piles and brush around your yard, which you haven't taken care of yet, are pure lighter fluid, ready to ignite. There are some fire hazards that aren't clearly marked, and they can impact you and your neighbors. Learn to spot them, because your home is better protected from wildfire damage when your whole community is prepared. Visit fireadapted.org for more tips on how to get started adapting your home and community to wildfires. A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
October 31st at the Times Union Center, Pretty Lights on the A Color Map of the Sun tour. Doors open at 7 p.m., concert starts at 8 p.m. Listen to 90.9 FM WCDB Albany for your chance to win tickets.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
We're back. You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB University at Albany. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, MSW, with Alyssa Lotmore LMSW, and Luke Stein on the board. Our guest this morning, she's here with us in the studio through the phone. The Body Language of Liars is her new book, From Little White Lies to Pathological Deception. Lillian Glass, Ph.D. She's also the best-selling author of Toxic People. Dr. Glass is a respected body language expert. She's lectured on body language and deception to law enforcement agencies, including the FBI. She's a jury consultant, expert witness in behavioral analysis. You've seen her on Entertainment Tonight, Good Morning America, Dr. Phil, CNN, and I can go on and on. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on this morning, Dr. Glass.
Oh, great to be on. Thank you for having me.
It's great. You know, you're a little fuzzy. Are you on a cell phone, or is it our equipment here? Try it again. Let's hear what...
No, is this better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because we want to hear what you have to say. The body language of liars. Okay, people being fooled. Anyone can be conned. It doesn't matter, as you say, how intelligent, old, rich, or famous you are. And maybe many of us have been scammed in business or from a friend or a coworker. But I just want to preface this by saying that as social workers, we are constantly, whether it's in a clinic or in private practice, trying to unmask, as you say, signals of deception with our clients, because clients come in with all sorts of problems, and very often many of them do try to con us. And so it is an issue in our profession. But I want to start out with the body language of liars. What is a liar?
Well, a liar is somebody, obviously, who's not telling the truth, somebody who is trying to deceive you, who's not being totally forthright with you.
Yeah, that's a liar. But there are liars and there are liars, as I understand from reading your book. Okay, right. So let's, the continuum, you know, there are those little white lies that we're assuming.
Yeah. And lying isn't all that bad. I mean, we all lie to a degree. I mean, you see a new mother has a baby, and the baby's not particularly attractive. You don't say, "Where's the tail?" Yeah. You know, you know.
Some of us do. Yeah.
How sweet. How sweet. You know, how cute. So that's one thing. And we see that lying can be also done to save people. I mean, you know, during World War II, people were saved. The people lied to save other people. They know they're not here, and they were, and they housed them against the Nazis. And, you know, we see that there are lies that can really help a person. You know, somebody may lie to somebody about their future, but they may encourage them, say, no, things are going to be great, and not to have them so deflated. So people do lie for different reasons, and we see this in infants. We see this in animals. We see it in children. And these are lies that exist for survival.
Right, so in that case, depending what I guess is motivating you, it may be okay to lie. It may be necessary. It may even save your life, as you're talking about in World War II. But
yes.
But you mentioned children because they do lie. Yeah.
And it's interesting. They lie as early. They found research that showed that as early as infancy, babies lie. And what a baby will do oftentimes is they'll whine and cry, and then in order to get the mother to come into the room. And as soon as the mother comes in, they'll stop, and or they'll fall down, and then they'll cry just to get some sympathy. So we see that often. We also see that with children. You see the little child has eaten the chocolate cake and it's all over his face. And you say, where's the cake? Did you eat it? And the child says, but the evidence is right there. So people lie to protect themselves oftentimes, or to protect others. And, it's interesting. We see it with animals. We see it with monkeys, with the chimpanzee Coco, the famous chimpanzee that was taught sign language, or I should say the gorilla that was taught sign language over at Stanford. And, there was a toy that was, that Coco is the gorilla's name, had broken. And when the trainer said, who broke that toy? Coco pointed to the other trainer and said, she did. So, they lie for protection, not to get in trouble. So we see this in the animal kingdom. We see it with dolphins, even. There was a situation where they trained dolphins to pick up trash at the pool, and they gave them a fish every time they brought up the trash. And so most of the fish brought up a large sum of trash and got a fish. Well, one dolphin in particular decided that she wasn't just going to get one fish, so she hid her trash behind a rock and then brought it up in little increments. So she got 10 fishes every time she brought up a tiny little piece of garbage. So we see lying there.
So, Dr. Glass, it's in our DNA, is what you're saying. And even I have seen that dolphin video, by the way. I think it was either on the National Geographic Channel or one of the... Yeah. So it is in our DNA. So it's something that's natural, I guess you would say. It's common for survival. The chameleon who changes colors so they don't get eaten. The animal that puffs themselves up to make them bigger so the other animal will be frightened, the wolf or whatever. So, you see this constantly in nature. All right, now let's talk about when it becomes... we'll get to the point of pathological deception, because that's kind of, I guess, at the other end of the spectrum. But how do we, going along, when does lying become not something that has to do with survival, or it's not healthy, but it becomes unhealthy, both for the individual and society?
When it hurts you, when it destroys you, when it devastates you, when the person you love cheats on you, when your child takes drugs and lies to you about it, when when people are conned, when they're conned out of money. In this day and age, we have to discern who is telling us the truth and who is not. We have to. It's too frightening to see what's happening from cyber liars, people that are dating, they're on the internet, and they're with somebody that they have no idea who they're with.
How do we discern cyber? Well, let's start with what are the signs of someone lying? And I assume, obviously, the signs of the communication signs are going to be different whether you're standing in front of somebody and looking at them, or whether it's on the net, because
right.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I mean, there's one common thread, which is consistency. And people can lie on the net, especially in the dating world. So if you see somebody that's not being very consistent and they tell you one thing or they say one thing in one email or text or when they call you, and then they said something else on their profile. That's a big, huge red flag and something to look at. Also, what people call themselves tells you a lot. Their moniker, how people...
Well, give us an example of a moniker, because a lot of people who are listening, we're at a university, do go online, dating online. So I think I'd like to be really specific about that. Like you're saying, their moniker may reveal that they're lying, or you say they change.
Or it tells who they are, like if they say, they may say, nice guy or something, and then in their text they may, be very sarcastic or very digging or very nasty. So that type of thing. It's just you look for signals. Some may have very macabre monikers or names that they call themselves. Pay attention to that. Look at people's pictures. When they post them online. Look in the background. People will say, "Oh yeah, I'm really wealthy and I come from this home and that, and I've done this and that." And when you look at their picture, if something doesn't fit, well, trust your instincts. And that's another thing we really need to talk about is instincts. Instincts are so important in analyzing liars. So important.
So let's go back to the photo, because there's a lot of photo sharing online, Instagram and other things too, and on Facebook. So you see a picture and you're saying, if you see an picture that you feel is inconsistent, you're looking at somebody and they want to date you, and your instincts tell you something doesn't fit. What would be examples of things that don't fit?
Well, I don't know. For example, somebody may have a picture with, their arm around somebody and they're, looking very close and chummy and intimate, and they may say, "Oh, that's my sister," when in essence that may be their lover or their wife or their significant other. So something like that. There's a lot of things in the background. Somebody may claim that they're sophisticated and they have this lifestyle, when if you look at their pictures, it doesn't seem that way at all. Or their pictures, you look at the number of them. So you have to really look at details in analyzing liars.
All right, that's on the net. Are there any other things that we can look for? I think because this cyber dating is is a big...
there's a whole book. That's why I wrote the whole... When you talk about lying, first of all, the most important thing I can tell your listeners is you have to look at context. Because I can scratch my nose, scratch my head, cross my arms, lean back. I can do all these things normally, and I may be telling you the truth. But, for example, if the context is involved, that's very important. And, for example, if somebody says, I was here last night, and they really weren't. They were at another event, and they are definitely lying to you. It's the context that you're talking about. So when you say, "Where were you? Where did you go last night?" and all of a sudden you see them lean back or they blink, and then they start telling you a story. Maybe they go into very much detail. Those are signals of deception. So, again, everything we're going to talk about depends on the context. So you have to be very, very aware of it. It's interesting to look at the tells. The body doesn't lie. Neither does the voice. Neither does the speech. Neither does the face. So there are 4 components to analyze liars. Number 1, you have to look at the facial expression, the facial movement. Number 2, you have to look at the body movement, the body language. Number 3, you have to look at the voice pattern, the sound of the voice. And number 5, you have to look at the speech content, because most of the time people will reveal themselves in the way they talk. Even the most seasoned liars, the most pathological, dangerous liars, the sociopaths or psychopaths, they will often reveal their behavior. So you can tell if a person is lying. The other night I was watching something on 2020, and they had a special about a man who called himself Rockefeller, Carl Greitlinger, and he was a big con man and even got married to a woman and had this incredible life that he told everybody that he was this big member of the Rockefeller family, that he was, very wealthy and he was very socially connected. But in reality, he was a murderer on the run. He was a nobody. And when you watch him being interviewed and interrogated, he's clearly a sociopath, a psychopath, actually. But when you see what he did in terms of his body language, it was fascinating. You saw a lot of the tells, a lot of the shoulder shrugging. You saw a lot of the head tilting. You saw a lot of the eye blinking. So even though this is a seasoned liar, you really did see it in the interview in terms of his revelation of being a deceiver.
Pathological liars, sociopaths have a consistency. What you're saying is to their lying, and you talk about a lot of them in the book that people would be familiar with. So I think some of the Scott Peterson, for instance, you mentioned Scott Peterson in his interview with Diane Sawyer. Talk to about his interview, because I think he was interviewed several times.
Yes, and first, one of the things you saw is he leaned in, and one of the things that was really prevalent was in his voice. He would die off at the end like this. See, the voice doesn't want you to lie. Your autonomic nervous system takes over. So what happens is the muscles tighten up. What are you talking about?
We're losing you a little bit.
Peterson. Well, I'm doing it purposely. I'm closing off my throat like this because that's what they do.
I see. Okay.
You hear them like this. They just choke off their tones. And so this is what you hear. It's called a glottal fry, a frying voice. And what I just demonstrated, where they do die off at the end of the speech pattern. You can't hear them very well.
And Scott Peterson, murdered 4 wives or 3 wives?
No, one.
One?
He murdered Lacey Peterson and her unborn baby.
And her unborn baby. Okay, yeah.
You're thinking of the other.
I'm thinking, who am I thinking of? There was one whom...
You're thinking of Drew Peterson.
Drew Peterson, right, yeah.
Yeah, he murdered a woman named Kathryn Zox. He was married 4 times. There's another woman, Stacey Peterson, which is still missing, and he claims he didn't do anything. And it's interesting because his approach to analyzing deception, he too has that glottal fry. He cocks his head to the side, but he's very stoic. He stares at you. So a lot of times a liar may look right into your eyes and not move, and that's very unnatural.
What about, I want to talk...
It's interesting, too. Now, I just want to add something.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you really have to trust your instincts on things. And there is something in your brain, in the middle of your brain, called the limbic system. And this is the flight or fight mechanism. And it tells you when something's right or something's wrong. And one day, I was at CNN doing an interview, and I was headed towards the makeup room, and there was a man standing in front of the door. His back was to me. But something felt creepy. I don't know what it was, but it just something, whether it was his posture, whether something didn't feel right. And as I got in the room, guess who it was? Drew Peterson. So it was very interesting. He was being interviewed at the time on the Larry King Show. So, we really have to trust those instincts.
Yeah, so you didn't dismiss your feelings, and I think for whatever reason we tend to do that. I mean, there's another psychological thing I think going on with us when we feel what you're describing, the reaction you had to him, to Drew Peterson. What about, what about Bernie Madoff? Because, you talk about, I think in the beginning I said that as you had mentioned in the book, you can be rich, you can be famous, you can be smart, and yet you can still be conned. And I think Bernie Madoff is a perfect example of that. How did he do it?
Well, Bernie Madoff, greed is a very interesting thing because people, they don't have to like you. They just want to make money off of you. But if people that really were with him. They didn't like him that much. I mean, it's interesting. You know, he may have been charming and wonderful, but he was very superficial. He didn't have a lot of depth to him. One woman's husband invested heavily with Bernie Madoff, and he had passed away. And the widow took over, and then she met Bernie Madoff and hated him. There was something about him she couldn't stand. She didn't like him, so she, you know, asked to withdraw the money, and I think he gave it to her, and she's one of the ones that got out okay, because she trusted her instinct. But again, people are blinded. They don't want to see. I mean, you're married to a man, and you know, you've got a beautiful home, you've got nice kids, you've got everything, and you know, you suspect he may be having a mistress on the side, but you don't want to see it. You don't want to know it. You don't want to. You see signs, but you don't want to admit it. Well, that's the same thing with money as well, and we have to look at what is, not what we want it to be.
I just have a question for you. I have known, when you talk about when people don't want to see things, and I had know a person who fell for one of those scams with it was a Nigeria scam, and she was telling me about this person, and I could tell that it was not right. You know, I mean, all the red flags were there. What she was saying, that he lived in a different country, but he was going to come visit, yada yada yada. Right. And what causes some people to just hold on, and despite the signs being so obvious, we know the warning signs, what causes some people to still fall for that?
Desperation. We all want to be loved. We all want to be talked to nicely. We want to be treated with respect. And these guys are slick. I mean, I was doing a Dr. Phil show once about deception, and this beautiful woman, she was talking, and she had been scammed by this Nigerian and bring him money, and you would think that, boy, this woman could get anybody, you know, she's so attractive. But that's not true. You know, when over a certain age, become less desirable, especially in this country. And, you know, here somebody was paying her attention and had a lovely accent and knew just what to say, and she fell for it. It was kind of her fantasy became her fantasy dream became her nightmare.
Yeah, but even when she started to have her doubts, but I think she was holding on to that hope. And then she confronted him. He said, yes, I was scamming you, but now I've fallen in love with you through it. And it was sort of this other type of pulling on these emotions of, you know, I still love you. I want to talk to you. And it took her months. I kept being shocked that she was still talking to this person every time I'd see her. And it took her months to really be able to pull out of it. And it was just surprising to me.
Well, I'm not shocked, and I don't fault her, because, you know, so many women, especially older women, they want that love and affection and tenderness, and they don't get it. And so, you know, I can understand it.
Yeah, I mean,
but
yes.
Again, here she is. Here this poor woman is. She's seeing what she wants to see and not what is. And unfortunately, it's what is. You know, you can get a phone call. I mean, and just a little thing, you know, looking at behaviors and studying voices and analyzing what really is, it's fascinating. You know, yesterday I talked to somebody, and I asked them if they wanted to do a lecture with me. And they were very, you know, they were just telling me all about their woes. And they were saying how they had so much to do, and they had a new job, and their wife was this and that, and going to school, and all kinds of excuses. Well, I saw what is, even though I want them to, you know, do the lecture with me. The truth, what is they're overwhelmed, they're under a lot of stress, and they don't want to do it. So I gave them an easy way out, wrote them an email afterwards and said, you seem so stressed, I'm just going to go ahead and do this one on my own. So again, it's just knowing how to read somebody and seeing what is, not what you wanted to do. Now, if I did it the other way and said, oh no, you know, that's no problem. Yeah, and then you said you could do the lecture, then the last that they pull out. You know, I shouldn't be offended because I saw that initially. So again, I saw a reluctant person.
So you have to, even though I didn't want to see it, I saw, I heard, and that's what we have to be, really realistic.
What did we see when we saw Lance Armstrong when they were interviewing him? Because in watching him in every one of the interviews, I turned to my boyfriend and I said, he's lying. I mean, it's just, to me, it just seems so obvious. So, and I know you...
Because you're astute, you saw what is, but let's say your boyfriend, I'm not speaking for him, but let's say your boyfriend was an avid bicycler and he was the hero of Lance Armstrong. Well, he may not have seen it as clearly as you.
So if someone has a stake in it, or more of a stake, let's say, for whatever reasons.
They're a bicycler, or they're, that guy's a hero, or maybe, heaven forbid, they've had testicular cancer, and they looked up to him as a survivor,
so
the hero.
All right, so it depends on where you're coming from in terms of how you see the person. But just point out, what was, you saw him and you watched him on television, and so what were the signs?
You see, the main sign that what you probably picked up, and so many people did, is thou dost protest too much. There was too much arrogance. There was too much anger. There was too much offensiveness. So, that just didn't jive. So that was the first sign. When people are very defensive about something, they're very, very angry. And also he would do a lot of tells, like he would look up, he would clap his hand over his mouth. The most disgusting interview is the one he did with Oprah Winfrey, because you'd think that was his opportunity to really come clean 100%. And to let it all out. And he didn't. He showed so many signs of deception during that interview, and it was quite disgusting to watch.
Let's talk about deception in terms of social work and a clinician, because that's where we sit. And you do mention it in your book also, but one of the cases of molestation, for instance, and lying, and very often you'll have kids who are, say that a stepfather, a father, or a brother molested them when it's not true, but it is.
It didn't, yes.
Yeah, and that has very serious consequences for everyone. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that's one of the things I do, is I'm an expert witness in behavioral analysis, and I'm also given tapes by deposition tapes and surveillance tapes and interrogation tapes from attorneys, and I analyze what I see and give them information. And so many cases, like we saw, I had a case where there was a high school student. She accused this teacher of sexually of exposing himself, and then she told a person who told a person, and then finally, like 4 girls came forward and said that they too were molested by this guy, and that wasn't the case at all. And when you dissect the verbiage of what they say, the tone of voice, the facial expression, the body language, you see that there was complete deception. And so we were able to pick it apart, and then this man, thank goodness, was acquitted, and he didn't have to go to, suffer the consequences. But unfortunately, I've been in cases where the girl has accused the stepfather of molesting her, of sexually abusing her, because, let's say, the mother is getting a divorce and told the child to say that, and they're dead man walking. And unfortunately, that's what happened in a case that I did in Florida, where I looked at the girl's testimony, I looked at her on the stand, I watched her videotape. Her behavior on the stand was, I don't know, and yet this man now faces 3 life sentences, or he is serving 3 life sentences for something he clearly didn't do. Because you'd have to be a magician to do what she said he did. So again, you see where this is so serious, and deception can, make or break you. And if you don't understand the tells and really dissect them and fight for your client, or fight for, either way, then you are doing a very disservice to the world.
Yeah, I think of it as an example that one of my kids had needed surgery, and I was taking him in prior to the surgery, and the physician was asking him questions, and he was a young physician, and it was my son, and he was in high school, and I was in the room with him, and he's lying on the door, sitting on the table, and the physician is asking him, does he do drugs, does he take alcohol, and is he sexually active? This is in front of his mother, and he's doing it, not looking at my son, but he's turned around writing it in his notebook without even looking to see either my son's reaction or mine. And I thought, this is a perfect example of what you would say. I mean, he had absolutely no clues as to who was the truthfulness of those answers. I mean, it was an interview that didn't have to be done. And that happens often,
right,
unfortunately.
Especially, in front of his mother, obviously,
Yeah.
he should have asked if he could leave the room
Yeah.
or whatever. But again, for all, that's rather benign. Or it could have been serious, because if he was taking drugs and he had to have medication, that
Exactly.
could have been a real problem. So, but could have been life-threatening. But I do think that and also what his sexually activity had to do with it, unless, he had some HIV or something, and the doctor maybe needed to take a test for him or whatever. But again, that's a real specific thing. But we're talking about in your profession where you, in essence, can save a person's life and have to be so vigilant and aware. And you can also ruin a person's life. And, unfortunately, I saw a situation with the man I told you about that is serving 3 life sentences, a social worker get up there, and it was disgusting to see the signals of deception and what she did. And basically, the fellow in question had 1 testicle, and she had the child draw the genitalia of her perpetrator, and she drew the phallus with 2 testicles. It was clearly not this her stepfather's genitals, and yet this social worker went through the system and still, based on what the mother said, based on what the child said. So it was kind of like instigating it. I saw another instance on a case that I'm working on now where a stepfather was accused of sexually molesting a teenage daughter. And it's clearly she's done this to get back at him. But what's very interesting is that the social worker was like an instigator, and watching her in the police room and talking to the police about it. It's like she was salivating. And, a lot of times, unfortunately, people in any profession, but especially in the social work profession, have to be very, very objective. And oftentimes they're not. They'll have a mindset and they'll go with it. And I've seen it, unfortunately, play out in a very ugly way.
Then what you're saying is we really have a major responsibility in our profession, and I guess we're not doing it. Well, are we not trained well, or is in your experience we aren't trained?
I think maybe the personality type or people like to see a crime, or they like to see the excitement, or they want to they're adding the fuel to the fire instead of being real professional and looking at it objectively with X, Y, and Z. They get emotionally invested and for their own agenda. And it was quite fascinating to see this on tape, to watch the social worker really salivate. Say, are you going to get him? Are you going to do a thing? It was like, what are you doing, woman? So, that is going to come back to haunt her in the court because, certainly the attorney is not going to let her get away with it, especially with the feedback that I've given him.
This is a training tool for what not to do.
Yes. And we hear cases in social work all the time here in California where the child is still put back in a horrible environment and, then killed. And again, it's like you really have to be objective. There has to be some guidelines. There can't be laziness. There may be a lot of cases that you have. You may be overwhelmed, but you can't be lax for a second. You know, take a nap, get it together, but really be vigilant on every single case you've got.
Good advice. Alyssa, do you have anything you want to add in terms of questions? Because we only have a couple more minutes.
No, I just completely agree. I mean, I think it's a lot. She was saying a lot about, Dr. Glass was saying it was about personality. And just because you're a social worker and have the background, I think the personality really does determine how you use your skills.
Oh, yeah, and when you watch this tape of this woman, it's like you want to vomit, really, when you see what she's done. I mean, she set the girl up. She definitely set her up. The girl was clearly lying. She wrote a little note, and it's all crossed out, and, you see it. There's so many signals of deception in the note. And she says, yes, I saw the note, and I heard what she said. And then she's instigating. And when she's on the stand, she's going to be ripped apart. She may even lose her license for what she's done.
Do you think people justify that by saying, like, I know he's guilty, so I'm going to do you think the social worker justifies it in her mind for her reasoning behind it?
Again, it's what I said earlier. It's what is, not what you want it to be, not what you think it is. When you see X, Y, and Z, like when you see a kid with cigarette burns all over his back, you don't put him back in the same environment. You say, oh, he probably had an allergy, or I think the kid's whiny, or whatever it is. You have to look at what is. And so many of these people, they have another agenda, and, they're human. A lot of people do. Or they're, a lot of these, which I call the crimies, the people that watch the Nancy Grace shows, and they love all the high drama, and they love all that, and that's really dangerous.
Dr. Glass, you're talking about child abuse, and that brings up I think there are other issues also when a child's in school and perhaps they're referred to the school social worker because the teacher maybe suspects that the kid is being abused. The social worker sometimes is bound not only by how she or he feels, but the whole system puts them in a position. And I'm not defending.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not. No,
it's like you can get caught up in the system. That's what's scary about your field, because it's kind of like you're in the system now, and then you can't get out. Once you're in, it's like being in a vice. You just can't get out of it. And I've seen it, in other cases, where I've had to be an expert witness, and it's frightening. And that's one of the challenges of your profession, because even though there may be injustice, there's not a whole lot sometimes you can do about it because they're in the system. It's like their head's already chopped off. So, you might as well figure, nothing I can do about it. So that's why you have to be so careful and just fight for justice and fight for what's right.
And for what is, as you say, not what you want it to be.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
not kind of manipulate the situation.
Well, it's been great talking to you today, and as social workers, I thank you.
And I want to say, and I really respect what you do, because there's some wonderful people in your field who do beautiful things and have beautiful hearts and really have the right intention. But unfortunately, there's a few of these thick apples in your field that really need to get a reality check.
Yeah, and there are very serious ramifications if they don't.
Beyond. It's like you have a person's life and death in your hands.
Yeah.
And you're the murderer if you get somebody in a position where they can't get out of the system.
All right. Well, that's scary. that puts the ball back in our. And you're right. You're absolutely right.
True.
Yeah.
You're a murderer.
Yeah.
You've killed that social worker. Helped kill this man who's got 3 life sentences now.
All right. Well, we've learned a lesson. Lillian Glass, Ph.D., and I'll mention the book again, The Body Language of Liars, From Little White Lies to Pathological Deception. Thanks so much for being on our show this morning.
Okay. My pleasure.
Yeah, great talking to you. Bye-bye. That was very powerful.
It's true. It's definitely true what she's saying. People do have the power when they lie to really change someone's life and really negatively affect it. And I think sometimes I love what she said, how it's not what you want it to be, because so many times I think people justify their actions because they think they're right, even when they're not, and they'll say, I can just do a little white lie here. I need to change, say this because I know I'm right, and this is gonna seal the deal. And it's really an important thing to just be open-minded and objective and not take sides. When we talked before she came on, Dr. Glass came on, about boundaries and how we are trying to build rapport, and I think sometimes some people didn't process, to have enough self-reflection to know what their boundaries are, and they get so entangled with these clients that they're going to do whatever they can to protect them, and they could be being lied to by their client, and they can't separate what is truth from what is not truth, and they go out on a limb and put their own career in jeopardy and their license in jeopardy because they don't have the power to separate work and what they know, like I said, what Dr. Glass said, it's not what you want it to be.
Well, for instance, and I was involved in a case once, I remember, you may have somebody who is being accused by, let's say, his stepdaughter of molestation, and perhaps this person has a history with other people, and you know that because as a social worker you have his record. But in this case, it didn't happen. So you have to be very careful. Yes, you have a history of someone who may have done this in the past, but has not done it now. And so you have to be very clear that, you just don't want to get rid of this guy just because of what he has done, but it has to be very specific and focus on what is, not what could be. Well, our next show is coming up, so we have to say goodbye. And I think we do, yes.
No, we still have like
5
minutes.
Yeah, okay, well.
She's just coming in to make
just
sure
coming
she's
ready. Yeah, it's kind of, in our studio, it's a little bit difficult because there's no transition. One show goes right into the next, and when you're doing a radio show, and Jaja Kutcher could add to this, you kind of have to transition in 30 seconds, which is not easy because stuff does go wrong, and you do have to get your mics in order and the board and all those kinds of things. But anyway, so this was a good show. This book was great. I read this book in one night, The Body Language of Liars, and it's
such an important topic, and something we all should know and be aware of.
And we have the capacity to do it, is what she's saying. Mm-hmm. You don't have to necessarily be an expert. You're not going to be somebody who's going to testify. But I think that thing about going with your gut, how many times have you had a feeling about somebody? How about just the example she gave? Somebody said, you invite somebody to go to the movies or to go out for dinner, and somehow you feel like, I know they don't really want to go, except they do say they will go with you, and you set that, and then, an hour beforehand, sorry, I can't make it, but I knew they weren't going to be able to make it. There was, that kind of a situation. Mm-hmm. But it's just going with your gut, and if you do that, you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think as social workers, we always try to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And we're always like, it's going to work this time.
Yeah.
I reminded them, I did this, I did that, and sometimes we still end up being like, oh, I should have just listened to my original instincts. So. There's a lot we can learn. I'm looking forward to hearing. Hopefully, she'll write more books, and it's definitely great information.
Yeah, and go ahead, Luke.
I often
you get the last word.
Another week in a row. Yeah. I often get that impression with ladies giving me their number. It's like, depending on how reluctant they are to do it or things like that, it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't actually text you, and this won't actually work out in a beneficial way to either one of us.
Yeah, well, that's another good example, especially here on campus, and that's true. And I think both sexes tend to do that. Oh, it's all right, call me, here's my number. But you get a feeling they have no intention, they don't really want you to call, or they're going to give you an excuse or whatever, but you feel it. If you really listen to your instincts, if you're talking to them, watch their body language and their voice. When you're on the radio, and all three of us are on the radio, one of the things that it's trained me to do is voice is so important. I can tell in the first 30 seconds of a phone conversation with somebody where they're coming from, whether they may say, I'm feeling fine. I can tell that they're not feeling fine. There's just something, as she said, there's just something in the voice. Or if they're not quite telling you the truth, you can hear it. It's not rocket science. It's really, you don't have to be a social worker or a therapist or trained, but it's just the experience, because that's all you have is the voice. You know, you don't have anything else. All right, we're going to say goodbye. Zsa Zsa Couture is here, dressed in a very different outfit this week. Last week she was all dolled up. This week is the wool hat, plaid shirt, and jeans. You look good. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone with Alyssa Lotmore and Luke Stein. You're listening to WCDB, University of Albany, School of Social Welfare. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Thursday.
So we've got our neighbor Paul coming over tonight for a barbecue, which is why I prepared a delicious lemon rosemary steak marinade from my special collection of old family recipes. To make sure the steaks are extra, extra, extra tender, I left them marinating out on the counter overnight, just like Nana used to.
Maria may mean well, but without food safety, it never ends well. Always thaw or marinate foods in the refrigerator at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, or you could make your friends and family really sick. Maria's neighbor Paul didn't think twice about